Friends, welcome to the show. I'm here with Kelly Teemer. She's a professional PR guru who I got the privilege of working with at Scribe back in the day. And now we kind of both run our own thing, marketing, PR. So it was only right that we got together to make this episode for you, because I promise you this is going to be a valuable, action-packed, practical tip type of episode. So you want to listen in, take some notes if you got a pen and paper handy, or maybe just pull up your phone and write down some damn notes. I promise you this is going to be very helpful. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me, Hussein, and hi to everybody listening, watching, all that.
Love it. Kelly, I want to go right into this. I want to know how you got into the PR world, especially in the publishing space, and how long you've been in the game.
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like this is something that has been calling to me since I was a kid. And I say that because back in elementary school, we had this program called Author's Chair, right? Where every Friday, our teacher would ask us to put together a voluntary story and come up in front of the class and read it. And I was one of the few that were pretty regular in creating kind of short stories and kind of was just always drawn to writing and things like that. And as I kind of progressed throughout my scholastic career, high school through college, I was really interested in journalism. I like the idea of telling people stories, getting ideas that are out there that are not normally covered. So I really found myself there. Went after college into production and doing some news producing for a local CBS affiliate, and loved my time in broadcast news, but felt like I wanted to do something a little bit different from a storytelling capacity. So I thought, public relations is kind of the caveat to journalism, where you work with journalists on behalf of your clients to tell their story. So worked in e-commerce for a while and kind of wanted to switch industries. And so when I saw a position with Scribe open where they're working with authors and thought leaders to tell their stories in that capacity, that really interested me. And I've been playing in the space for 6 years ever since.
That's dope. I love it. So you got into Scribe and you started working with obviously tons of authors, experts in the industry, the publishing space in general. What stood out to you the most in your experience in that time frame of working at Scribe that you didn't realize was even a thing in publishing and in PR? Does anything stand out to you specifically?
I would say I was surprised to find out just how niche different media verticals are. So
Mm,
one, yeah. When I first started in journalism, I was taught kind of the traditional methods of, so that's encompassing of broadcast, radio, print publications, magazines, things like that. And when I got into Scribe and publishing, it was pretty astonishing to see how many different types of audiences there are across various podcasts, publications, etc., social media groups that really span the entire spectrum of authors that were interested in getting the word out about their book. And so that I think was most eye-opening to me, was just how many different audiences there are for a book.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I feel like in the PR world specifically, there is obviously, like the things that you learned and then how they apply later as far as an online presence is being introduced, right? So, like everything from social media, of course, podcasting, and all these kind of newer, modern, I guess you could say modern, in the last 10 years or so, things have gotten changed a lot. Um, how would you say PR is playing a role now in like sort of taking advantage of these new waves, like podcasts, like what we're doing right now, right? Having a little bit more access, less gatekeeping. Do you think it's gotten a little bit easier, or do you think it's gotten a little bit harder to get noticed as an author?
I think it's gotten much harder.
Mm,
Across much, much harder. So
mm,
there's a couple things that have happened, especially within the last year in the journalism industry, that has kind of led to this. Number one, the traditional publications that are out there got rocked by layoffs earlier this year. So what you're seeing is less of in the newsroom full-time reporters, editors, things like that. You're seeing a shift to a freelance capacity where multiple writers are working for multiple publications, And so trying to get their attention for a story is a little bit more difficult these days. Another
Mm,
thing to think about is, again, coming from the perspective of traditional journalism, of broadcast radio, TV, what you're really finding now is that journalists care a lot about how much of a digital presence you have. Do you have an established website that accurately and favorably portrays what you're thinking? What's your social media following? And that's really key, because what journalists want is for you to share their stories that you're included in. And the bigger reach they
mm.
get, the more clicks they get, the better the deal overall is for them.
Amazing. I'm so glad we went there. And we're going to go there much deeper because that's where I feel like a lot of my work relies on. And I have to do a lot of convincing to people that it's like, it's not just getting on the, whatever American online show, morning show, or whatever afternoon show. And I'm like, that's fantastic that you want to get on there. That's great. But why? Why should they have you on there? Right? Like that was my question to myself. Why should the news put me on for my book? And I thought about that so deeply that when I was at Scribe, I remember I told Emily, I'm like, I think I came up with a really cool. So I started running when I was writing my book. And this really helped me create a marketing strategy. And to me, I thought it was genius. Let's just be real here. Like I was just like, you know what? Why don't I do like a run walk for refugees on World Refugee Day? And like let that like get people attracted to that thing, that people can gather around this park, we can go for a walk, you can do a run, and I was just kind of formulating this idea. And I was like, and you can buy a t-shirt. At the time I was printing t-shirts and stuff. I was like, you can buy a t-shirt and then like you will get a gift, which is my book, right? That kind of encapsulates the story of the refugee sort of world, the refugee story. But here I am like trying to attract people, organizations, and whatever. And guess what showed up? The news showed up, the newspapers showed up, you know what I'm saying? Like everyone wanted to tell this story about all these people, immigrants, refugees who are bringing awareness to this social issue, right? And that was like the coolest thing that could have ever happened. And we did it twice, like twice, and then now it's being done, and I'm not even there. Like the communities have just taken it on as a thing, and it's so cool to watch unfold. But the coolest part about that was I didn't talk about my book. I really just like, yes, I was launching a book and all that stuff, and I was just kind of like, here's how I want to celebrate it. And so the attention actually went to, and it was much easier to get the news attention when you say, I'm doing this thing for the community and we're bringing awareness to this thing. And for some reason, that just made it click, right? And I sold a bunch of books. I got opportunities to speak. We had like 3 cities that did it. We had the mayor, the freaking governor show up at one. Like it was crazy. Seriously, it was amazing. But it all started from me going on jogs and realizing like, how can I not talk about the book, but bring attention to what's inside the book, right? The inside the book is my story, but I'm like, but who else has that story? And there are tons of refugees, tons, right? When I did that, that for me made me understand marketing in the author space. I was like, okay, it's cool that you wrote a book, but why does a journalist, why does putting you on the news, why does it matter to them? And like, of course, if you're a renowned author that already has a platform, that's an easy one. That's an easy grab. That's a low-hanging fruit for them. But if you're unknown, what are you talking about? What are you bringing our attention to? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of creating an online presence, and what does that mean to authors that you work with?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you touched on that a little bit. I think one common misconception that a lot of authors have, especially first time authors, is they say, I wrote a book, so I want to be on Good Morning America. I want to be featured in this publication. I want to be here, there, everywhere. And I want to talk about my book. Well, nobody wants to interview a book. They want to interview a person with a story behind it. And so
Yes.
the really important thing, as you were doing with your running efforts for your book, is crafting a story around key seasonalities and key dates and themes that align with what a news organization might be covering, and pitching yourself that way. And all the more bonus if they will actually talk about the book and let you plug it and things like that. Sometimes they'll say, Hussein's the author of Art of Resilience,
Right.
but they will not necessarily dive too deep into the publishing process, because that's not what their viewers are interested in listening to.
Right. Right. And so like understanding even their audience and what key things they're interested in, and like kind of positioning your book to be a thing for them, right? I think the thing that I run into a lot is really helping authors saying like, this is not about you. Like, this is not a resume. This is not a like whatever. It's got to really matter to who's putting you on, whatever it is they're putting you on, an article, an online show, whatever, even your podcast. Like I have a whole video about, being interviewed on a podcast show. And I'm like, don't talk about yourself. Like if they ask you, of course, the back end of all these things, but like really talk about what the audience needs. And if you can position, like if you're an expert that can help their audience do X, Y, or Z, why wouldn't they have you on there? Right. But then what are the elements that legitimize you to be an expert in that space? Having a book, of course, is one element, but then your online presence is such a key factor because they're going to Google you. How many times do you Google people on like a weekly basis? I'm just curious.
Oh my God. I mean, in my personal time or my professional time?
Oh yeah, right.
No, that's
Exactly.
very I had an old coworker. Her husband was in the police force and things like that. And I used to have just such a knack for Googling and not stalking people, just getting deep into the web results that they're like, I'm going to hire you when I open my own private investigator firm.
Right. Yeah. Because
But I
that's
would
what we
say
do now. Yeah, like that search bar is right there. And whether my wife and I are watching a movie and she's like, "Oh, I forgot that actor's name," or whatever, right? Like, and then you go down this rabbit hole of like all this stuff, all this, the trail, right, that we leave behind really matters because that's what people pick up on. And so I tell people, I'm like, what happens when you Google yourself? And they're like, oh my God, it's embarrassing. Like, I don't even come up, or like, oh my God, don't click on my website because it's embarrassing, And I'm like, these are key indicators as to what we need to do, because look, if you're trying to feel and look premium, or like at least package your expertise in that way, then a book cover is one aspect. You still have like 10 other things you got to like kind of cross off. So all right, let's talk about the authors that do have those things together, that do have like a good online presence, perhaps even a smaller, kind of bigger following and influence. Um, you know, those kinds of things are dialed. Their branding is good, and all those things are put together. They're a speaker, perhaps, or a consultant, so they have like a high ticket item with their book now. When that person approaches you, when that author approaches you and says, hey, I got all these things together, but I'm kind of missing this PR component where I need to connect with the right outlets that can share my message. How do you, like, what are the benefits of that? How do you work with someone like that?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a ton of benefits and a ton of levers to pull. But the most important thing to start with is figuring out what your goals are in publicity. Do you want to be on a morning show just to say I was on a morning show? Because as fast as the news cycle changes, that's going to be going away within a couple hours. So what is the purpose of publicity? Is it to increase your awareness and credibility? That can certainly be a facet of that. But a lot of people want to reach out to me because they want more visibility online from an SEO perspective. So getting placed on podcasts and getting articles written about them, or inclusions in articles that are being written, are really valuable for that. Maybe somebody wants to elevate their speaking career a little bit more, but they don't necessarily have a lot of practice for that or results to showcase in the past about past speaking engagements. So getting them on podcasts or video content that they can slice and dice into a reel later and use that as potential social proof to get themselves booked on a speaking gig. That's really important. Or a lot of authors I've worked with are interested in getting more clientele and trying to reach a niche audience that might be exactly who they're looking for. And so establishing, okay, who is that audience and where are they playing into and what do they care about, and crafting outreach that really aligns with those audiences to get the best chance of actually getting booked and placing those interviews.
I love it. What would you say, like how much of that percentage would be you trying to help them place specifically podcast interviews for their niche? Because I feel like podcasts have such a huge range now, and they go into those pockets of niches, and some of them have big audience, some have smaller audience, but I'm like, yo, if you can get into those pockets, right, and like own that market and like get on like 10 podcasts, that's just as effective as getting onto one big one that you really want to get on, but that's more general, right? So talk to me about that. What kind of podcasts do people want to get on, and then what kind of podcasts do you get them into?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that the podcast that comes up the most is the Joe Rogan podcast, because it's the largest podcast in the world. And so everybody wants to be on Joe Rogan's podcast. And
Sure.
unless you're writing about something very specific that aligns with what he's talking about, I don't see why it would necessarily make sense to do that. And so I see a lot of, Jen Hatmaker's podcast. They really want to be on Mel Robbins' podcast, things like that, places that they've heard of. But what I really see is the value of niche podcasts. And a great example of that is I was working with an author in financial services, and an audience he really wanted to get into or in front of was engineers, because they were his ideal type of client to bring into his portfolio. So I placed him on a really niche podcast focused towards engineers. And after that podcast dropped, he ended up getting so many listeners inquiring about his financial service capabilities that it actually funneled millions of dollars into his practice.
Amazing.
There's value
I
in
love that
niche.
story. Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to take this conversation. When we understand who we're speaking to, then all the tools that PR offers, your online presence, your website, your blog, your news, all of these things become like a laser. They just penetrate through all the noise and reach the exact person, and it'll make their ears perk up and like want to connect with you. I can't tell. I mean, you have plenty of these stories. I have a bunch of these stories where people literally, I'm like, yo, just start posting on LinkedIn. Here's what you got to do, whatever. I walk them through those processes, and they just kind of get over that fear of like, I do have a boss and I do have this job, but I'm doing this thing on the side. What do I do? I'm like, tell your boss. Just be like, hey, I'm posting about this content because I want to grow my side thing, right? Or my speaking thing or whatever, grow my speaking muscle, which will actually bring more value to my job. And when that person does that, when they had that honest conversation, their boss is like, that's totally cool, man. It's your LinkedIn profile. I'm like, I told you, like, no one cares. And then they went on, they started posting, they started putting valuable content, and I was coaching them through all that stuff. Same thing, just started locking in speaking opportunities. One guy locked in a $250,000 consulting opportunity from a post. Like, think about that, from reaching, and that thing went viral, and the most like niche transformational strategy stuff for like banks. I'm like, that's so crazy. But the more niche and the more you understand that niche, there's like millions of companies out there, maybe hundreds of thousands of companies out there that could value your expertise. But it's like, instead of trying to reach everyone, just try to reach the right people. And then eventually you can crawl out of that space, right? And like go bigger and all these kinds of things. I think I always talk about Andrew Huberman. He's a good example, because for a long time he just floated around podcasts, and he floated up, right? Like all the way, like if you go back to his early stuff, those podcasters aren't even podcasting anymore. Like, some of his earlier ones. which is really great. But then obviously he worked himself up all the way to Joe Rogan, which then from that he leveraged into starting his own. And I tell people all the time, it's like, do it. What does it look like for you for 5 to 10 years doing that kind of work? And some people can't think that far ahead. And I'm like, but that's the cool thing about your book. It's just going to float on a shelf for the next 5 to 10 years. So you might as well amplify it, give it the voice, give it the legs. You're the message. You're the messenger of that message. So it's up to you. And if you can't get over that fear of putting yourself out there or reaching out or connecting with someone like you that can at least help them get connected, then they're kind of like losing out on these opportunities, you know? What else would you add to this? I mean, I feel like our conversations always, float around not only how we can help authors, but what's one thing that really works when an author puts it together? Like, is it like a one sheet? Is it like a bio? Is it a good photo shoot? What's something that people can take away and be like, okay, I'm going to go do this one thing after this podcast episode, and it's going to help me move the needle forward? What would you say that thing is?
Yeah. So, especially with respect to publicity specifically, I would say put together a media kit for yourself. So, what that encompasses is when I'm working with some of my clients, an all-in-one place folder, however you want to display this, that it contains your headshot, your biography, if you have a book, a copy of your book, the book description. And then another thing that I think is really helpful is putting together an interview prep sheet, which has sample questions that anybody in the media who has indicated interest in interviewing you can quickly scan the sheet so that they have sample questions to pull from. Thought starters, things like that. The easier that you can make any media contact's job easier, the better it is long-term for the relationship, for networking opportunities, for success of the flow of the interview and how the content plays out, everything like that.
Yeah. I love that so much. Just a media kit. Put together a folder of some good photos. I would say get a photo shoot. Like, there's this amazing app called Snapper, Snappr. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, right? I always tell people to go there. Just book a photo shoot. It's like a couple $100. Book a little WeWork thing, get some photos. I promise you a premium photo goes so long. And then adding that to the things that you had mentioned just now in the media kit, it's amazing when it's all there and ready, and you can just email it and not have to scramble and pull it together and do they need this, do they need that? I think that's huge. Thank you for mentioning that. A media kit is crucial. And if you can embed that media kit, obviously, if you step it up into your website or into your blog or whatever, somewhere online where you can give them a link to it, it's even better, where they can download things on their own. And so I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that. So if you're out there, if you're thinking about, okay, what's the first thing I need? What's the simplest low-hanging fruit thing I can do? Put a simple folder together, put those few things that Kelly had just mentioned, and put them together. Have them ready. Get ready. And then the next thing I would say from my end is practice. Practice doing a couple of podcast interviews. And honestly, get on a Zoom call and tell the person the 10 questions you want them to ask you and practice answering them. Make sure that, again, you're not just talking about you, your history, your resume, but really framing those questions in hopes that you're helping the audience. Just like how Kelly is doing right now, helping you get familiar with what you need to do to get better as an author and putting yourself out there. So that's really important. So what are some of the biggest opportunities you have seen some authors land from putting these things together, from putting their online presence together, from listening to you, of course, taking your coaching, 3-month, 6-month journey working with you? What are some of the biggest opportunities you've seen authors land? What do those look like?
Ooh, yeah. So I was able to help an author out to get on the Impact Theory podcast by Tom Bilyeu. So that was a pretty big win.
Huge.
Yeah, that was a big win. And that really came from, I'll be honest, months of studying the podcast episodes and the types of content that they're putting out. and waiting for the opportunity to be able to say, okay, now is the time. And I think that's something that authors really need to think about is you have to do your homework about what they're covering. And there's always a way to tie in your message with what they're catering their audience to. And that's going to give you the most likely chances of getting on those dream podcasts or pieces of media that you want to be on. Studying seasonality. What month is it? What date is it? Is there, as you said, National Refugee? Is there an opportunity editorially for you to tie that story in together? Same thing that we always said at Scribe and is in the publishing industry is that people want to see themselves in your book, in your messaging, in your podcast interviews, in everything that you're doing. And that's going to be the same thing for media. You want to be giving something of value that they can implement into their lives.
I love that. Yeah. And if you already have an audience or a growing audience or whatever, that person's going to look at that as an opportunity for them too, to grow their audience, to grow, right? And it's a shared opportunity. Like you got to look at it as like, how can I benefit from them? Because you will, but most importantly, how can they benefit from you, right? And if you switch that around, man, when I did that, that was like the biggest game changer for me. Like just in general in life. That's not just marketing and PR advice. That's just general life. Like if I can create, which led me to create Rising Authors, community, being supportive, doing this podcast, doing my thing in the van, having these books behind me, it's all oriented around what is the most value I can bring to an author, in this marketing space. So it's very clean cut, like shaven. And I was just on a call with a mentor of mine, especially around YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, let's get clearer. Let's get even like literally I wrote it down. I'm like, okay, I don't just help authors, do this, like I help authors build their brand, period. Like he was just like, just own that, man. And I was like, it's so hard to own it, but you're right. That's what I do. You know what I mean? And it's okay. Like, it's like, just go into that niche, nestle in, buckle down. It's going to be a long journey, but build on that. And man, it's led to obviously being friends with you and so many amazing other people. And I've gotten to learn so much. What would you say, like, if there was one more tip? I know I've kind of clung on here, but one more tip, especially for an author who is maybe like just thinking about marketing and PR, and they're kind of in the book writing process and they're kind of tightening things up, but now they're kind of looking at like what happens next and all that good stuff. What would be like that first little thing to like make sure you start thinking about this? What is that for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the number one misconceptions I see with authors is that they go from writing the book to immediately wanting to get attention for it from a publicity standpoint. And they're missing the key step, which is where you come in, which is establishing a digital presence and putting out regular content that is valuable, that is not just check out my website, buy my book, I've got a pre-order, things like that. You need to be establishing regular touch points with your audience and showcasing your expertise as much as possible before the book even comes out. I think there's a lot of missed opportunities, especially when the book is not yet out, but you're kind of in that the book is ready. Maybe there's opportunity for lead capture. One thing I would suggest for you is putting together a free first chapter of your book and driving people to your website. And if they sign up for your email newsletter, they receive a free first chapter. That's lead capture for you to further give them new content and things like that, and just get them further in the marketing and consideration funnel.
I love it. Do you see how I led you to that? That was perfect. That was great, right? Like it was, I set it all up and I'm paying you later. Don't worry. But
this is not paid.
Thank you for mentioning that. No, thank you for mentioning that. I always try to really like help people identify with that. Like, look, all of this stuff is important. Really, your book, your expertise, all of these things. But like, what if you posted once a week? What if you posted twice a week? You can share stories about your book, share why it's been hard to write a book, why it's been easy, what chapters were difficult, why was it difficult, like just sharing those little elements can now get people's attention that, one, you're writing a book, two, that it's interesting, and three, you're being vulnerable by sharing things that are difficult, things that didn't work, things that are working. And when it's ready, when it goes out there, it doesn't like come out of nowhere and it's like, buy me, buy me, buy me. It's, I know you've been following my journey. It's been crazy. Now it's finally ready. If you want to support me, this is the way to do it. I'm also open to podcast interviews if you know somebody that knows somebody, right? But putting that out there like that over a span of 6 months and then finally asking, you're positioning yourself as not like a person that's just trying to sell a product, but really spreading your message, which is, I know you get this a lot. Like if there was one thing every author says, it's like, I want to help everyone, or my message is for everyone. And I was like, cool, you, Jesus, Buddha, Prophet, they all came with that, right? But then they put in the legwork and sacrificed everything to get that message out there, right? And so you got to think like that. It's a long journey. I would say it's an infinite journey. But thank you so much for hanging out with me, Kelly. Like this was really eye-opening as far as like the fundamentals of PR and understanding them and what we need to do as authors to prep for it, align ourselves with those things, and work with people like you to help us get connected. All right. What's one last thing you want to leave our audience with?
Sure. So I think the one last thing I want to leave you with is what happens after the interview is over and published. So
Yes.
it's online, it's there, it's visible. You might have somebody Googling you that day, you might not. However, one of the biggest mistakes I see happen with authors is that on their website, once an interview is complete, they don't have an in the media page. They don't have that social proof that people can easily access to see, okay, I've been in 5 podcasts, 3 publications, this broadcast segment. Which can play a huge part in your overall goal of why you're publishing a book. If it's more speaking, if it's more potential partnerships and clientele, they're a lot more interested in figuring out the value that you have to say that just slides you down that funnel for consideration in the future. So I would definitely say once the media interview is complete, make sure you're showcasing that on your website for further social proof and consideration.
I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much. That was like seriously icing on the cake. You are incredibly passionate about this work, and it's why I wanted to do this episode with you, and really why I wanted to align our work together. And I know we're going to be working a lot together, of course, in the future, as far as like handing off clients to one another, because we really, it's like the zipper effect, right? Like there are components that I'm not familiar with, I'm not good at, that you are, and vice versa. But like ultimately, this is what I love about what I'm trying to do with Rising Authors, is that there's people like you in the community who can support different authors, different experts in a unique way, in your own way, and from your vast experience. So thank you for that. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being in the community. Thank you for being an advocate, like helping these authors, especially sort of after the debacle with our previous work environment. Unfortunately, I love how much people came together, supported one another, and really were like, no, I want to support you. I want to see what you're doing with your thing. I want to do that. And I just got to say, like, genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you for doing what you do. It's hard. We know it's hard. Like, PR is not easy, period. But you do it with such grace and you show up. And I've heard nothing and continue to hear nothing but great things about you and your work. So if you are interested in getting PR for your work, anything that you're doing, especially if you're a speaker, consultant, coach, and entrepreneur, if you will, that can benefit from the leverage of PR and good PR, please reach out to my friend Kelly Teemer on LinkedIn. We are currently working on her website, so you better believe that's coming, and it's going to look fire. I promise.
I know it. I know it. Thank God for you, because honestly, it's been just way too long that I don't have a digital presence. And, I have a LinkedIn, obviously you can see that there, but that's why I'm so grateful for you, because so many authors and clients I talk to say, I don't have a digital presence at all. And I am so grateful that I have you to refer them to and say, you
Yeah.
have an world-class expert ready to talk to you. So I'm very grateful
Thank you,
for
Kelly.
your friendship, our partnership, and all the authors
Yeah.
we're going to be supporting.
Hell yeah. Kelly, thank you so much. Appreciate you hanging out with me today.
Thanks, Hussein. I'm so glad to be here.
That was fire. I love
Yeah?
it. Just give me a second. Yeah, it was fire. It's just it's ending the